Ireland has acknowledged it's facing a crisis as far as it's agreed to open its books to the IMF and the EU. That scrutiny begins tomorrow. For more on the likelihood of a bailout, I'm joined by former chief economist of the IMF, Ken Rogoff, in Boston. Thank you so much for joining us, Ken. I'm not an expert on these matters, you are, but
pleasure.
To me, if you look at the numbers, Ireland is bankrupt, it needs a bailout. What's the experts' view?
They're in a tough corner. It's not easy to get away without one at this point, but they could last for a while. I mean, 1 month, 3 months, but ultimately I do think they're going to have to turn to the European Stabilization Fund and the IMF for support. And by the way, when that comes, that's not the end of the story, because eventually they have to repay that, and we could still see further restructuring in Ireland.
What happens when a country does go bankrupt? Is it allowed to go bankrupt by the European Union, do you think?
It happens all the time, even when they're not supposed to. So certainly, I don't think it's quite as traumatic as it's painted. Most countries have gone through that. I've studied with Carmen Reinhart 800 years of financial crises, and we've all been through them, and we come out of them. But certainly Ireland's in a classic one. So is Greece, so is Portugal, so is Spain. They're going to need help from the European Union and the IMF. That might prove enough, but it might take years before we're sure of that.
Everyone seems to know that they're going to end up with a bailout. So why do you think European politicians, particularly Irish politicians, are claiming that it's not going to happen and everything's going to be fine? They keep talking about how they've got enough money to get into next year.
Well, there are two things. First, Ireland wants to maintain its sovereignty. When you come under an IMF program or now a European Union program, you have to meet their conditions, and they're very fundamental: tax increases, what happens to government spending. And I think the IMF in particular tries to take a light hand, but it's not easy. Europe, on the other hand, they're worried that whatever they do in Ireland sets an example everywhere else. And so they're trying to fumble for a framework, and honestly, they don't have one.
Aren't Irish politicians also holding out for an agreement which is probably being done behind the scenes, and they don't want to unsettle Irish residents and start a run on the banks?
Yeah, maybe so. You certainly don't want to have this play out in slow motion for a long time. The crisis is clearly picking up steam, and you mentioned people leaving Ireland, not just money. The big problem is the economy is not growing, and with all the tightening that they're going to need, it's not growing for a while. You just can't go through that year on year. You can do it for 6 months, 9 months, but it's just been a long time, and that's what they're struggling with. Ireland wants conditions where it can grow. That's what they're bargaining for.
Just very quickly, how long do you think until this bailout is announced or agreed?
Boy, you know, it could be in 2 days, could be in 2 months, could be in a year. I do think we'll ultimately see it.